It's time for a playoff in Division I college football from a football fan's perspective. The BCS tenure began in 1998 with the promise to bring us a real title game in Division I college football. Instead, it was a power grab to gain control of the Rose Bowl. The Pac-10 and Rose Bowl made a deal with the devil when they gave up control of the Rose Bowl in 1998. The one game in Division I college football that was a true playoff game. The Pac-10 champion versus the Big Ten champion gave us the granddaddy of all bowl games. As a football fan since the early 1970s, the traditional Rose Bowl meant everything. The East Coast media bias was no stranger to Division I football before the beginning of the BCS tenure. That made the Rose Bowl even bigger to football fans. But 1998 and the BCS would change all of that. Of the 24 teams to play for the BCS title, only USC is west of Texas. All teams with the exception of two, USC and Virginia Tech, have come from the Big 12, SEC, Big 10, or the state of Florida. The last four title games have involved just the Big 10, SEC, and Big 12. This is not just because of East Coast bias, but has a lot to do with big money schools and popularity. So many facts that point to this. The one I like to touch on is the Bowden rule. No one had more power than Bobby Bowden in Florida State. Florida State played in the first three BCS title games. Florida State played in a conference, the ACC, that many felt was not near as competitive top to bottom as other major conferences. But if you had the same record as Florida State at season's end, regardless of your schedule, you were out. The 2000 season is a classic example of the Bowden rules. Miami beat Florida State but lost to the Washington Huskies. All these teams ended the season with one loss. Oklahoma ended the season undefeated, and the BCS computers were left to decide which one-loss team would play the Sooners for the 2000 season's national title. They chose Florida State despite the fact Florida State lost to Miami and played a soft schedule. But the team that really got shafted was the Washington Huskies. The Huskies beat Miami and played one of the nation's toughest schedules. Washington played three teams that finished the 2000 season in the AP Top 6. The Huskies also beat Oregon State, giving them their only loss of the season. Many experts considered Miami and Oregon State the hottest two teams at the end of the 2000 season. The Huskies kept both these teams from going undefeated. Their only loss was at number 6 Oregon, where the Ducks were almost unbeatable during the Joey Harrington years. The computer poll had 8 elements, all controlled by humans, that had majority rule on who played in the BCS title game. One of these elements ranked the Huskies out of the top 10, blowing them out of any chance to play for the title. A blatant display of East Coast bias which had nothing to do with computers and everything to do with control. The Huskies were not even considered for the 2000 BCS title game. The argument was Miami or Florida State, but not even Miami, who beat Florida State, could erase the Bowden rule. The two most overrated teams in the BCS tenure, in my opinion, would play for the 2000 season BCS title. Florida State would rarely cross midfield and losing to Oklahoma 13-2 in a horrible BCS title game. Washington would easily beat Purdue in a meaningless Rose Bowl, and Miami rolled over Florida 37-20 in the Sugar Bowl. The next season in 2001 would convince me those controlling the computers had an agenda. Miami finished the season undefeated and needed a one-loss team to play for the BCS title. Nebraska lost its last game of the year to Colorado, 62-36 to end their 2001 season. The Cornhuskers did not even win their half of the Big 12. But the 8 elements of the BCS computers picked Nebraska to play for the BCS title. How does that compute? The Oregon Ducks were the outright Pac-10 champions and ranked number 2 in both polls. The only team besides Miami with one loss or less in the 6 major conferences that were outright champions. The obvious choice to play Miami for the BCS title. But because of the same 3 elements in the computer poll that shafted the Washington Huskies in the 2000 season, the Ducks were taken out of a once-in-a-lifetime game. David Rothman, Peter Wolf, and Jeff Sargent ranked the Ducks 8th, 8th, and 9th, putting 14 two-loss teams ahead of one-loss Oregon in the computer poll. Had these 3 elements ranked Oregon 6th or higher, the Ducks were in the title game. The 5 other elements had Oregon 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. You couldn't have them anywhere else. The 2002 BCS title game in the Rose Bowl was enough proof to see the BCS was flawed. How could you put Nebraska, a team that did not qualify for its own league's title game, in the BCS championship game? How does that compute? In the bowl games, Oregon crushed Big 12 champion Colorado 38-16 in the Fiesta Bowl, and Miami would dismantle Nebraska 37-14 after taking a 34-0 lead at halftime of the BCS title game. I'm always going to remember the names Peter Wolf, David Rothman, and Jeff Sargent as those who impacted the 2002 Rose Bowl. The BCS and those that controlled Division I football took a lot of heat after the 2001 season that ended with Nebraska in the BCS title game, despite not winning its own conference. So the powers that control Division I football tweaked the rules of how the title game was picked to soothe over the angry outcry from fans, coaches, and players. To me, this whole scenario was like giving Bernie Madoff a second chance. Are you kidding me? In the 2003 season, the whole debacle from 2001 would repeat itself. The Oklahoma Sooners would lose the Big 12 title game 35-7 to Kansas State, but still remain #1 in the BCS polls. Shocking. Oklahoma would become the second Big 12 team in 3 years to play for the BCS title without winning their own conference. USC would roll over Michigan in the Rose Bowl and finish ranked #1 in both major polls to create the first split national title in the BCS era. LSU would beat Oklahoma to win the BCS title game. I will add, in 2001 and 2003, the two teams impacted were outright Pac-10 champions, Oregon and USC. Both these teams were shafted for Big 12 teams that did not win their own conference. As fans, we need to demand a playoff at season's end, just like every other team sport in college, both men and women. There are many other teams like the 2001 Oregon Ducks and the 2003 USC Trojans that have been victimized by the obvious bias of the BCS format. I would like to present to you the top 10 best teams that are champions despite the BCS and their obvious bias. These teams should be recognized as champions.